Yeah, so definitely we can, I see no reason why the state legislature can't put together a band, you know. You got a couple musicians.
Yes, it could be constructive.
Yep. And you got a couple singers too.
Hmm.
Well, I don't know if you've ever followed our Twitter accounts and some of the stuff that's said on those. I would hate to see what they would do when we put a band together.
Good morning, folks. If you're just joining us, we are going to give others maybe just 2 more minutes, something like that, to also join us, and then we will begin the morning scoop at 8:01 in the morning.
Well, while we're waiting, Dave, I'd like to thank you for sponsoring. I know Luigi's going to be talking about that, but appreciate all you do at AGC, how you support the legislature, and I appreciate that. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Gray. You talk about Mr. Bradley. I feel the same way about you and your class, and you're always willing to talk to folks, and you're probably one of the most civil legislators I've dealt with in my career, and I've been doing this for 23 years. So I want to let you know how much we appreciate all the people on the panel here that are just classy. I mean, you don't go to the majority leader of either party without at least being someone of a consensus builder and someone that's willing to, as Mark Killian says, use both ears and one mouth.
Yeah.
That's what Mark Killian used to.
For those that are joining us, one of the things I had said that I now that more people are coming on, I'll use this time to say that again. I'm going to deeply miss Minority Leader David Bradley. Not that I'm not going to be happy working with Rebecca, but in my short time in the Senate, I've had the pleasure of working with David, not only in his role as Minority Leader, but on committees. And I was just impressed with his passion for people, how he deeply cares, and he's going to be missed. I know I'll miss him a lot. I think there'll be a lot of people, staff and legislators, who will miss him not being there. But I also know that he is going to be overjoyed with the freedom and the life that he gets back now that he's out of the legislature. But if you happen to be watching, David, we miss you. And I deeply appreciate the opportunity to have had to work with you. So
thank you for that, Senator Gray. I think we're gonna start. It's 8:01 in the morning. Good morning, everybody. Thank you again for spending the morning with us. My name is Luigi Del Puerto. I'm the associate publisher and editor of the Arizona Capital Times. By the way, if you don't have an Arizona Capital Times subscription, let me know. We'll get you squared away. You need it. It's probably one of the best Christmas gifts you can give to yourself. And also you support local journalism that way. We have a lot to talk about this morning, but first I want to thank our sponsor, the Arizona chapter of the Associated General Contractors of America, ACAGC. ACAGC is Arizona's oldest and most influential not-for-profit association of general contractors, subcontractors, and other construction industry affiliated firms engaged in highway, heavy industrial and municipal utility construction. One of the most effective trade groups at the state capitol, the Associated General Contractors, has been representing Arizona's contractors for more than 80 years now. And here to welcome us this morning is David Martin, the president of AGC. David has served as president of the organization for nearly 24 years now, leading its chapter operations, public relations, educational programs, and legislative affairs. He previously served as deputy director of the Arizona Rock Products Association and as leadership policy advisor and assistant to the majority whip for the Arizona House of Representatives, where he had advised the House Republican majority leadership on issues, notably in the area of air quality and transportation. David?
Thank you very much, Luigi. We're so grateful to be able to partner with you on important forums like this. We know that the audience out there is dying to hear from this auspicious group of leaders that give them a little bit of foresight and looking forward to what's going to happen in the legislative session. We know that it's going to be a very, very dynamic process, not the least of which you're going to have to navigate through with the pandemic. You know, we see all the things happening over the last 30 days with the election and with the dynamics of the caucus, and are grateful for our partnership and really appreciate the fact that we have an opportunity to be able to share this great group with you and the Capital Times. I just want to put one plug in for those of you that don't know. We have a vacancy at AGC. We're right across the street from the Capitol, and we have some office space available. So if you all are listening and are interested in having a place close to the Capitol, give me a call. Luigi has my information. But with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Luigi. Thank you. I'm going to bug out. I won't be on the screen. I'm just going to be a participant. So thank you very much for the opportunity, and have a great conversation.
David, just before you go, you haven't, when you say you have a vacancy at AGC, we're specifically talking about office space vacancy. And so if you want that space, which is, by the way, right by the Arizona Capital Times as well, go ahead and contact David. Or if you want to shoot me an email, I also have his contact information. Thank you again, David.
Thank you. Have a good day.
We have a great panel this morning. Joining us is Senator Rebecca Rios, who represents Legislative District 27. Senator Rios will serve as Senate Minority Leader of the 55th Arizona Legislature, of course, starting next year. She currently works as the Senior Government Affairs Advisor for Florence Copper, and also as President of the Florence Copper Community Foundation. She's a fourth-generation Arizona native, earning her bachelor's and master's degrees from Arizona State University School of Social Work. She has 25 years of extensive work in behavioral health and nonprofit fields in our state. She first served in the legislature in, correct me if I'm wrong, Senator Rios, in 1995. Of course, she's a veteran of both the House and the Senate chambers, and she's the daughter of former Arizona State Senate President Pete Rios. Senator Rios, thank you again for joining us.
Good morning.
Also joining us this morning is Senate Majority Leader Rick Gray. Senator Gray represents LD 21. He was born and raised in the heart of the Midwest, Omaha in Nebraska. On their first visit to Arizona, Rick and his wife Lisa fell in love with the state, and shortly afterward moved to the Phoenix metro area. After arriving in Arizona, Senator Gray contributed to the Arizona economy by starting a small business which focused on the Northwest Valley area. He also became an active volunteer in the community that he loves, and he sits or has served on the boards of several organizations, including the Sun City Homeowners Association, the Sun City Community Assistance Network, and the Sun City Taxpayers Association. He was appointed to the Arizona State Senate in January 2018 and then elected that year. And he previously served in the Arizona House of Representatives from 2011 to 2017. He ran unopposed this year. Senator Gray, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Luigi.
Also joining us is Representative Ben Toma, who represents LD 22. Representative Toma will serve as Majority Leader of the House of the 55th Legislature. He was born in Romania, and he came to America in pursuit of the American dream in the 1980s. He has lived in the West Valley since 1996. He's the co-founder and CEO of Century 21 Toma Partners. Is that Century 21 or Century 21st?
That's 21.
21. Thank you again. Century 21 Toma Partners, one of the fastest growing Century 21 franchises, and one that has been consistently named as one of Arizona's top 25 real estate brokerage. He previously managed billion-dollar budgets and prepared financial forecasts for top executives at American Express. He is involved in his local church, where he serves as music director. He also serves in the board of directors of Benita International, a nonprofit organization established to help orphans and the needy in Romania. Representative Toma, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
And finally, joining us is Representative Reginald Bolding, who represents Legislative District 28. Representative Bolding will serve as House Minority Leader of the 55th Legislature. He currently serves as House Minority Whip. His work in the legislature focuses on education, economic development, criminal justice, and veterans and civil rights. A first-generation college student, he graduated at the top of his class from the University of Cincinnati, where he earned an undergraduate degree in criminal justice and international security. He turned down a full-ride law school scholarship to become a special education teacher in South Phoenix. In 2010, he started a nonprofit organization to provide students from low-income communities access to internships and workforce development training at top companies and organizations in Arizona. Currently, he runs a civic engagement organization called the Arizona Coalition for Change, which empowers everyday citizens to grow their civic and political power to change their communities for the better. Representative Boulding, thank you again for joining us.
Thank you.
And
District
to our audience,
District 27.
I'm sorry, yeah, District 20. Sorry, I apologize. District 27, yes. To our viewers and to our listeners, please do send in your questions. We will try to get to as many of them toward the end of the program. And Representative Boulding, thank you for correcting me. All right, so I think I'm going to start with just a softball question. As you know, 3 Arizona counties now have a substantial spread status. One of the doctors, Dr. Andrew Carroll, the medical director at Atembis and who serves in the board of directors of the American Academy of Family Physicians, said, "We're going to have a horrible Christmas." Those are his words. As of Thursday, we have recorded 12,300 new cases. Our state ICU beds are full at 90%. As you know, Governor Doug Ducey's position is clear. He will not order any businesses closed in those 3 counties. And his office said that the evidence shows that the spike that we are seeing in Arizona is not coming from businesses that the state can control, but instead from things that the state cannot, like family gatherings. I guess my first question is do you agree with the governor, or do you believe that more strident measures must be imposed, such as, for example, a stay-at-home order or even curfews and requirements on travelers, such as what other states are doing? Let me start with Senate Majority Leader Rick Ray. Go ahead, sir.
Well, I love your softball questions. I can't wait till you get to the hardball ones. Those are going to be interesting. Yeah, you know, some of this comes down, I guess, difference of opinion is going to be different political philosophy. I default to personal responsibility. You know, the second article in our Arizona Constitution says that government is established to protect and maintain individual rights. Sometimes we in government tend to think, okay, we've got a certain level of control, let's get more control. And so I'm a strong proponent of making sure that government protects and maintains individual rights. And so there's a personal, I think, a personal responsibility. You've got people that have extremely strong immune systems. And then you've got people that they have health issues. They could have diabetes, they could have cancer, they could have some serious health issues where they have to self-quarantine on times like this. To put a blanket mandate across all of those groups of people, I think is inappropriate for government. If you have health issues, you need to be aware of that, and you need to take more precaution. But to just put a carte blanche, you know, this is what we're going to do across the board, I think would be grossly inappropriate. I think the governor's position on that is an appropriate one. And again, if my view too is with businesses, they know their customers and they know their employees. As a former business owner, which I'm now retired, you want to take care of your employees and you want to take care of your customers. So I think we need to make sure that we actually, as a government, fulfill our constitutional responsibility to maintain and protect those individuals' rights.
Thank you, Senator Gray. Representative Boulding, sir, the same question to you.
You know, I think one of the things that's important is that we recognize that COVID-19 has real implications. The reality here in Arizona, over 380,000 people have already tested positive, and over 7,100 people has literally lost their life. And I totally recognize and understand the idea of personal responsibility. I think we all have a personal responsibility to protect our health and safety, but also to protect the health and safety of those around us. And the reality is that what we're seeing happening, whether it's in large gatherings or whether we're talking about businesses that some who may be acting irresponsible, is that you were putting people's life in jeopardy based on your personal responsibility. So the question is, where does the line end to begin? When you think about entering our K-12 system, you know, we have vaccines that we ask our kids to go into and to actually sit in the classrooms. We ask people to have, you know, car insurance when they're driving their vehicles. We require folks to not carry, you know, guns on planes, you know, and those are all personal responsibility type deals. But we know to protect the safety of those around us, we ask people to actually to take a higher margin. I believe that we need to have things in place like a statewide mask mandate. We also need to make sure that we are discouraging any large groups larger than 25. The reality is when you have gatherings and you're encouraging that, you're putting people at risk. And as state lawmakers, we have to be the front line of defense for those who can't speak for themselves. So I think we have to be aggressive. I don't think we can stand on the sidelines and say, look, we can't do anything about it because it's happening in people's homes. So we're just going to play it. We're just going to let it play how it should. We have to actually take active measures to make sure we're protecting the health and safety of Arizonans. That's what we were elected to do. And sometimes it's making a hard decision, making a hard call, where some people won't support you and some people will. But that's what a job is of a lawmaker and a leader, is to make the tough decisions when the tough decisions are needed to be made.
Thank you, Representative Bolding. Representative Toma, the same question to you, sir.
Thank you, Luigi. You know, I do agree that there is a balance here in terms of personal responsibility and also asking people to be conscientious of the health and welfare of others. But if we can trust Walmart to be open and Costco to be open, then we can trust small businesses to be open as well. So, you know, and you have to, as you actually said during your introduction, Luigi, I was born in Romania at a time when it was a communist country and the government had a very heavy hand in what you could do. As a matter of fact, to protect the environment and to conserve fuel, there were certain days where you couldn't drive your car. Back then, as I remember, of course, I was too little to drive, but I remember they had days when if your license plate ended in an odd number, you could drive, and if it was an even number, you'd have to wait till the next day to go somewhere. And those are the types of things that I mean, I understand the goal in that particular case, as I do understand the goal here, but I think ultimately it is a tough decision, as Representative Bolding said. But I think we have to, as representatives, we have to represent our constituents. And I can tell you my constituents overwhelmingly want the decision to be theirs in terms of where they go, where they're able to go, what type of gatherings they're part of. Now, that said, I do think, as I've said before, that it's okay and it's reasonable to ask people to be conscientious of the health of others. But I'm not going to be the type of person that thinks the government knows best. I think ultimately that is up to each individual person to do. So for those reasons, I would be against any sort of shutdown. Final point, keep in mind that this is not happening in a vacuum. This is a worldwide pandemic. And as you look at other states, many of which have, some of our neighboring states even, have enacted lockdowns, the same sort of spikes, and this virus is doing sort of a similar thing. Yes, it may spike at different times, but the reality of it is you're seeing in California, New York, places like that have had much tougher measures taken, the same sort of trajectory as you are here. So, you know, respectfully, I just don't see how doing a lockdown is particularly helpful.
And Senator Rios, finally to you, ma'am, the same question.
Yeah, you know, the fact of the matter is we are in the midst of a crisis. The fact of the matter is the United States has done the worst job in this worldwide pandemic. We're #1 in terms of infections, and Arizona, unfortunately, is #1 in terms of infections. You know, what I think people need to grasp is we are in the midst of a crisis. And in emergent situations, you have to triage. In emergent situations, you have to listen to the experts. If everybody exercised personal responsibility responsibly, and we had folks wearing masks and you know, some of the other mitigation suggestions that have been made by medical experts, then we would not be #1 in the country. At the end of the day, we have 7,000, you know, dead Americans and their families trying to put together their lives after that fallout. I think the recent closure of the state capitol highlights the seriousness of this. And you know, I would venture to say there's not a lot of spring chickens in the legislature, short of folks in the House Democratic Caucus. And so, for our own safety, for the safety of staff, for the safety of Arizonans, I really think it's incumbent upon us to listen to the medical experts. This is not going to be forever. If we have to do something for 2, 3, 4 weeks to ensure less people die, then that's what needs to be done.
Thank you, Senator Rios. Before I ask you the preparations for 2021, we've heard from staffers and pages of the state legislature, and they're wary of legislators who are not wearing a mask. And you can just, I'm sorry about that. You just heard my kid there sneezing again. And so my sincerest apologies. But you have staffers and pages, for example, that are wary of legislators not wearing a mask. And I do want to pose the question to Representative Toma and Senator Gray. What's the conversation around, at least in the state, the state house and in the state Senate, actually coming up with some sort of a mandate for everybody that goes in or in the building to be wearing a mask? Let me start with Representative Toma.
Thanks, Luigi. All these softball questions, one after the other. That's an ongoing conversation in terms of what the policy will be. I can tell, so I can't really specifically mention where it's landed yet, because we haven't, quite frankly, I'm not aware that we've agreed. Ultimately, as you know, it will be the speaker's call in terms of what any of the policies to enter the building. And, there's lots of questions surrounding this. How will the public be able to participate in committee process or debate, or how will members be able to participate either meeting with constituents or lobbyists in their offices versus on the floor? What will the roles be? I think what's on the table, everything's on the table at this point, and actually it's something that will be, and I plan to continue to discuss with the minority, with Representative Boulding in this case, to see what we can come to agreement on. I will tell you that as a matter of, on my personal opinion, since I'm the one talking, I guess at this point, I think that having a mask policy for the building is probably appropriate. And that's again to protect everybody that could potentially be exposed, including the staff that is there. That said, in terms of personal, space, such as a member's individual office, I think that probably should be up to the individual member if they choose to wear a mask while they're in their office. In terms of on the floor, that one's the most tricky at this point. As you probably have noticed, and if not, for those that haven't noticed, we have had installed quite a few shields, plexiglass shields between desks, and also each member is at least 6 feet apart as they sit at their desk. So if you're sitting down, you're following the CDC guidelines up to this point. So I think requiring members to wear a mask to and from their desk is definitely on the table. I'm not sure that we've landed yet on what happens on the floor.
And thank you. And I do want to point out that, of course, in the House of Representatives, you have more people, like theoretically double the size of the state Senate. Senator Gray, same question to you, sir. What are the considerations? And is the idea of requiring everybody to wear a mask, and specifically including members of the chamber? Where are you on that?
Well, again, as Representative Toma said, we haven't nailed down everything, that all of our policies either, but I think that's going to be one of the probable priorities is mask wearing. And again, as he said, when a member's in their office, that's a different story. And it's unique at the legislature in the fact that legislators are not employees. They are, in essence, agents serving their districts. So we didn't hire them. They were elected by their districts to come and serve. And so each legislator has a certain level of autonomy in that. So as he said, when they're in their office, that's one thing. I know we've got members on the Republican side that kind of view this as a liberty issue. It's one of those things that it is a challenge for some people. But I think that, my view is, pretty much treat others the way you'd want to be treated. And so we have to be sensitive not only to other members, but also to our staff. And so I think that would be a high priority for us as in the Senate.
I want to ask Senator Rios a quick response, ma'am. What do you make of the idea of actually mandating everybody, including legislators, to wear a mask? Most of the time, maybe not when you're in your Senate office, because that's a little, it's enclosed, but when you're out in the hallways, you're out, when you're on the floor, what is the conversation in your caucus, and what kinds of conversations have you had with other members of the members of the other side of the political aisle?
I think from my caucus position, yes, that requiring mandated mask wearing of everybody in the Senate should be the bare minimum. I think this idea of a different set of rules for legislators versus staff is incredibly offensive. Again, personal responsibility, right? And personal liberty should not entail you to endanger other people's lives. So from our caucus position, there should be a mandate that everybody wear masks at all times when they're, with others. In your office is a different situation as long as you're by yourself. The other issue is we need the ability to enforce these protocols. They can't be guidelines, they need to be protocols, and they need to be able to be enforced. And this notion that a staff member can approach a legislator that's not wearing a mask and tell them to put it on, it's not going to happen. So we need to ensure that there's going to be some enforcement. But yes, as a minimum, we need masks, and we intend to continue that conversation with the president. And hopefully, within the next couple of weeks, we can come to some agreed upon protocols, because we are rapidly approaching session. And if we're going to open up in 3 or 4 weeks, it cannot be business as usual until these issues are determined.
Representative Bolding, I want to ask you, sir, one of the ideas that is being considered, from what I understand, is doing the opening day of session maybe outside of the doing the traditional ceremonies outside of the building. So out in the, maybe out between the two chambers, or out in the Rose Garden, or something like that. So just for the opening day, what are some of your suggestions in so far as going about and ensuring that you do minimize the risk of infection? And what do you make of the idea of holding the first day of session, at least the ceremonies, outside of the two chambers?
So I want to jump back into the question with regards to the chambers, and absolutely we'll hit the opening day question. Look, the New Hampshire Speaker of the House just died of COVID. Lawmakers are not immune. And I think that's extremely important for us to realize. And we have to make sure that we also are there to protect those who can't speak for themselves. So this is the most important aspect, especially when we think about our staff, when we think about lobbyists, the public, custodians. Ms. Rios alluded to it. The reality is the power dynamic between lawmakers and those who may be coming to visit, talk with lawmakers, it creates a very difficult situation. And as leaders, and I want to definitely tell Mr. Toma, and as I mentioned to Mr. Bowers, we'll be there to support rules that will protect the health and safety of not only the members, but also the staff, because it's extremely important. And that's where it's going to take us to have courage and have those difficult conversations with our colleagues and get it. No one wants to be put in uncomfortable situations, but when it comes to health and safety, we have to make sure that we stand up for those. With regards to opening day, yes, I think we have to be creative, but the reality is there's a lot more days after opening day that we have to be prepared for, whether we're talking about virtual legislature. And if that is a route that we're going to go to, it has to be a virtual legislature that allows lawmakers and the public to have full access to the practice of what it means truly to be participating in government. So you should be able to ask questions. You should be able to make statements. You should be able to actually participate. We're in a global pandemic, and no one should be penalized from participating in democracy because their health and safety has to be put at risk. And I'm hopeful that Mr. Toma, Mr. Bowers, definitely the House minority, we are open to finding solutions that will allow the public to participate and allow members to participate without putting their health and safety in mind. So with regards to opening day, if we need to do it in a rose garden, if we need to do it in a Chase Field, if we need to do it, wherever we need to do it, let's make it happen. But I'm more concerned about a normal course of business and making sure that we can actually protect the health and safety of those people who need to actually get involved.
So Senator Gray, the idea of holding ceremonies outside, of course, there's still going to be people there. You're still going to be congregating to a certain extent. In theory, it's not as bad as if you were, inside a chamber, a closed chamber, for example. But your thoughts are what are the conversations so far with leadership when it comes to the opening day? And I guess the second question would be how will 2021 look like in terms of, committee hearings, floor votes, and, caucus meetings, for example, the traditional things that you normally would do in a non-COVID year?
Well, first, I think one of our priorities in the Senate is to make sure that we have and maintain open and transparent government. So as Representative Bolding talked about, people being able to testify and be involved, that's a priority for us. I know each chamber is going to have their regular opening day in their chamber. Yes, we will probably have a joint session to listen to the governor in a more open environment, an outside environment. All those details are still being worked out, but that's what I expect. But yeah, our priority is to make sure that people that want to testify are able to testify, which means if they have to do it digitally, then they do. As we see here, Zoom works. And so it's going to be a process of working out all the details and making sure, and there may be, just like with everything, improvements as we go along. How do we maximize this? We really haven't done this as a chamber. So it's going to be a process. I don't think the way it starts out is necessarily going to be the way it ends. We'll learn and grow from that. But again, the driving direction that we're going is to make sure that we have open, transparent government and that people are able to interface with legislators, address issues, and make sure that communication is clear and direct.
One of the things that happened, this year is the state legislature explored the ability to allow for remote voting, for example, and notably for members of the legislature who may be more vulnerable if they get COVID-19. What about that idea, sir? Where are you on that in the Senate? Are you exploring the ability to vote remotely? How feasible is that? And I guess you mentioned, we are on Zoom, so we can do this one. The technology is obviously available. But are you exploring virtual committee hearings and virtual voting?
Well, we've already had virtual committee hearings during the off session. We've got JLBC, JCCR. So we've had that in the interim. One of the questions is when it comes to our Constitution requiring people being present, does that allow virtual presence? Those are things we just still need to iron out completely. But we've had at the end of this last session, we had people that voted virtually, not as much in the Senate as in the House. The House was had many more virtual votes than we did, but we've had those situations and we worked through it. And I expect us to continue to do that.
Representative Toma, the same sets of questions, sir. Virtual committee hearings, obviously that's, technology is feasible for that. But of course, we're not necessarily talking about regular hearings, in which people actually are in present, in committee hearings and they can speak, in front of their legislators that way. But what are the considerations in, insofar as virtual voting, both in committee and on the floor, and virtual committee hearings for, as a substitute to regular committee hearings?
Yeah, I mean, I actually agree with Senator Gray on this. Everything's on the table. As was mentioned, there is sort of a higher density, right, in the House because we have more members, and being able to vote either completely virtual or from one's office, for example, where you are, in your own space with a closed door and whatnot, so you can be separate. That's all on the table. In terms of committee hearings, same thing. Virtual committee hearings are very possible. Perhaps committee hearings where the access is very structured in the sense that some of the things we're talking about are if someone needs to testify, they come in, they testify, and then they leave and they go outside, and it's sort of an orderly process by which the actual exposure from one person to the next is very limited. So those are all on the table. I think it's fairly safe to assume, without stepping ahead of myself here, that some sort of virtual options will be available for those members that choose to use them. And we've got members in the House, for example, we've got members in the House that are part of the medical field that practice, that work in hospitals dealing with COVID on a regular basis. And so obviously, by definition, they shouldn't be around other people just because they don't know when they were exposed, right? They're almost exposed on a daily basis in that sense, in their line of work. And so we do have to make accommodations for that. But it's not, entirely super simple either, because as Senator Gray mentioned, we do have requirements to be there. And a final point, I totally understand the point about staff not being able to tell a legislator to force them to do one thing or the other. But there is a distinct difference still between someone that's elected and sent over by their district to represent their district and is voted in, and versus someone that is an employee of the House or the Senate for that matter. So there are differences that we have to keep in mind when we make some of these policies. Because I actually agree with my Democratic colleagues on this, we shouldn't have a policy that we're not going to enforce. So we have to make sure that whatever we do is reasonable and enforceable and applies to all parties.
Thank you for that, Representative Toma. Let me shift to your legislative priorities in 2021. Obviously, we have outstanding issues. There are bills that we were not able to get to this year. Among them, for example, the idea of ensuring the businesses won't have to face, what's referred to as frivolous lawsuits. But there are other priorities for, again, even this year that the legislature never got the chance to tackle. So let me start with Senator Rios. Ma'am, what is your caucus's, let me just say one or two priorities, top one or top two priorities this year? Next year in 2021.
Given the current pandemic, I think one of the top issues that we feel the need to address is how are Arizonans coping with the fallout of this COVID-19 pandemic, specifically looking at, the eviction protection fund and replenishing that if we're not going to extend the eviction moratorium, providing relief, obviously, not only to the tenants, but the landlords, I think is critical. Again, the health and safety of Arizonans. When are we, looking at education and how we're going to ensure that we keep the promise that, schools aren't going to, endure more than a 2% cut with regard to enrollment, and looking at, the issue of current year enrollment versus prior year enrollment funding. I think those are going to be some of the top issues that we're looking at as a caucus.
Thank you. And Representative Bolding, the same question to you, sir.
Yeah, I'll echo many of those, in addition to, unemployment reform. One of the things that I think every lawmaker in this state can say is that they've had a constituent reach out to them about unemployment and essentially the low amount that we actually provide here, which actually one of the lowest in the country, $240 a week. We have to create unemployment reform. And that's an area where I think we can have bipartisanship and approach to really help those struggling Arizonans. The fact of the matter is we have to make sure that the recovery works for everybody. So we want to definitely support our small businesses and make sure that those individuals have the ability to not lose their businesses and also can support those workers who are there. We also believe that there's a great opportunity for criminal justice reform. We know that's an area in which we talked about prior. We know that that plays a significant way, but first and foremost, our number one priority is making sure that we get COVID under control, because if we can get COVID under control, we can start to dive into some of these other areas. And COVID really translates to everything from, child care to returning our students back to school safely, UI, eviction protection. There's so much that we have to make sure that we focus on. And if some priorities have to wait until we get this under control, then that may be what we need to do.
Senator Gray, I'm sorry, go ahead, Senator Rios.
Just add to what Representative Bolding is saying with regard to, unemployment insurance. I think it's probably incumbent upon us to address the fact that the insurance trust fund is at risk of solvency issues, right? And so what are we going to do? Are we going to fund that with CARES dollars, with budget stabilization funds? Are we going to take out a loan from the Department of Labor? But according to Director Weishart, come January, that fund is going to be running dangerously low. And so that is also, I think, a priority issue that the legislature needs to address.
Thank you, Senator Rios. Senator Gray, let me modify the question a little bit and ask you more specifically, what do you want the first bill to get enacted into law? What do you want that bill to be, in 2021?
Well, first of all, as majority leader, I don't control which bills are first or not. Obviously, some of the comments that were made, regarding the landlords and the renters, we've had stakeholder meetings to actually help address the landlord issues, because the renters were giving some protection, but the landlords weren't. Those issues are going to be ongoing and do need to be addressed. Obviously, for all the people that are on your Zoom are readers of the Cap Times, so that elections are going to be one of the big issues, because of all of the concerns about whether the software was accurate. There's just a lot of questions have been raised, and unfortunately there hasn't been an investigation to prove. And that's my concern, is that we need to verify for our voters that they know that they can count on our election process to be fair and accurate. So those are going to be some of the big issues. Again, I don't set the ones that bills that are going to be coming first. That's an action of the body. My role as a majority leader is help to facilitate our members, and hopefully our bills that they want to run. And we've got members that are very actively involved and have certain levels of expertise in a lot of different areas. And so they're going to be running those bills, whether it's election, education, tax issues. I fortunately don't have the requirement to pick out which bills are going to be advanced first. I will say, though, that one of the priorities that we do have in the Senate that we've talked about since sine die is we've had a lot of bills that had bipartisan support that didn't get across the finish line. Many bills that actually came over from the House that were sometimes unanimously supported, but strongly bipartisan, that just died because of a sine die vote. So we are looking at trying to expedite those. We've had several bills that had strong consensus that just didn't make it because of the COVID issue. And so we do want to try and expedite those as much as possible in the Senate. I hope the House will do the same, because when we've actually heard the bills before, we're familiar with them for the most part. We can hopefully not have to spend a lot of time. Hopefully we can get those on committee calendars early, get them pushed out of the chamber and over into the other chamber, so that we've got, again, those bills that are strongly bipartisan, good policy. And that's what I'm looking forward to for this next session, is that we focus really on good policy, not politics.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Senator Gray.
And so that to me is the top priority, not necessarily what's the first bill any more than what's the last bill. We need to get good policy through, and that's our focus in the Senate.
Representative Toma, I want to ask you a more specific question, sir. As you know, back in June, if you recall, Governor Doug Ducey guaranteed that schools facing steep declines in enrollment will face no more than a 2% cut in state funding. Senator Rios alluded to this a few minutes ago. It now looks like Governor Doug Ducey's office is unable to fulfill the promise, primarily because the request for funding exceeded the amount that he had allocated for this particular program. I'm curious to know what your conversations are with school districts, and more specifically, do you anticipate the legislature making the districts whole, or at least ensuring that their state funding does not fall below 2%?
Well, I mean, it's a good question. I don't know that I can speak to where exactly we're going to land on that yet. I will tell you though that I'm a proponent of school choice, the parental choice in Arizona in terms of where their kids go to school, and there have been quite a few changes, quite obviously, due to the fact that the pandemic hit. So many of the school districts, as your own child is sitting to your right, I'm guessing, based on.
He is.
Exactly. So as you can see, I mean, lots of parents are doing the same thing. At one point in our household, we had 6 different Zooms going on at the same time, all 5 of my girls on one Zoom or another with their classes. And we actually have internet problems during that time because there's too much bandwidth used up by it. So, I understand it's a very real issue. And so obviously for some parents that can work from home, it's less of an issue and less disruptive than for those that don't. But I think school districts need to adapt to just as much as charter schools have, perhaps private schools, home schools. I mean, all those different options, everybody's got to adapt to this new reality. So if school districts are losing that many students, then, at some point they have to consider what it is that they need to do, some changes that they need to make to ensure that they stop losing students. I mean, that's first and foremost. But going to the budget issue, it's a premature question, simply because, as you probably know, Leade, and the rest of the panelists know as well, we still don't know exactly what our budget numbers are going to be yet. I'll remind everybody that back in, when was it, May, when we sine died, then our projections was something like 1.6 billion in the hole after having roughly $1 billion in surplus prior to that. Now the situation has gotten much better from a budget standpoint, and it looks like we're back to surplus monies again. And so, yeah, education is always going to be priority. But in addition to education, there are quite a number of other priorities. I actually agree and look forward to working with the Minority Caucus on criminal justice reform. One of the things that I know I'm diverting for just a second, but in the House, when you're looking at the number of committees, we're down to 13, and they are very much focused on the areas of priorities for this following year. We have a lot of work to do. As Senator Gray said, there are lots of bills that perhaps died prematurely because of COVID when we went to sine die earlier this year that need to come back. But in addition to that, you look at the only committee I'm serving on, for example, as a majority leader, is criminal justice reform. So I think that gives you some idea of where some of the priorities are. But those are areas that I hope we can work with the Minority Caucus on. Final point, just in while being on this call, there was a tweet attacking something that I said out of context earlier on, and by a member of the other caucus, not in the House in this case, in the Senate. But that's the sort of thing that's just not helpful. I truly hope that we can move beyond constantly taking something out of context and attacking each other, because I think the days of the bomb throwing should be over at this point. We need to really get together and agree and work together to actually solve some of these issues, and constantly attacking each other without even giving each other the benefit of the doubt is not going to be helpful to moving that forward.
Before I ask Senator Rios, go ahead, sir.
Yeah, and there's a couple of things I definitely wanted to mention, especially on elections and education. First is, we are worried that, all of the election disinformation will lead to unnecessary restrictions on early voting and registration. And what we've seen over the 7 failed lawsuits, it showed that our election system is strong and that the election ran well. And here in Arizona, when you have the top of the ballot that went in favor of Democrats, and then you had the middle of the ballot that, and many would say, held strong for Republicans, we're talking about the same ballot. So we can't say in one instant that the ballot is working for when we win the races, but then the ballot doesn't work when we don't win. So those are tough conversations that caucuses are going to have because there's no way that we can work our way around this. It seems it could be hypocritical to make those claims. So we're going to have these strong conversations. We are concerned about that. I mean, and also with regards to education, the reality is that yes, there are students who are leaving, and that's primarily because of COVID fallout. Evictions. Yeah, they're leaving because of loss of job. Healthcare issues. Like there are concerns. So we have to make sure that as state lawmakers at the legislature, we are serving as that line of defense, especially on those two issues with regards to elections and education, which will take up a lot of space this upcoming year.
Senator Gray, I want to give you the another opportunity, sir, to outline the priorities of your caucus for 2021. I think one of the things you mentioned is that fast tracking the bills that already have bipartisan support from this year and getting them expedited. But in terms of actual issues and policy priorities, maybe you can cite one or two or three of them for 2021.
Well, and I'm still working with my members to kind of focus on what the majority plan is, where their emphasis is. So this is a work in process, and obviously there's been a lot of stuff going on. So I don't expect to have everybody's focus right away because there's just so many people so busy. But again, those election issues will be one. I think it's one of those things where, again, if I had gotten the feedback from everybody, I would be able to give you a little bit more consensus on some of the other issues that we do have consensus on as a caucus. But obviously the budget is always a big issue. But apart from that, just to be fair and honest, I'm not going to pull things out of thin air that I'm going to predict. I wait to hear from my members and don't assume that they think this or that. I want to hear from them exactly where they're at on their priorities.
There's always the option too. If you have heard from your members, just let us know at the Arizona Capitol Times so we can go ahead and write about your legislative priorities. I'm very much open to that one as well. Just real briefly, because I want to get to the audience questions, but Representative Toma, you alluded earlier about the fact that earlier on during the pandemic, we expected state revenue to go down perhaps as much as $1 billion. In fact, the state is collecting higher revenue than otherwise anticipated. The October's numbers, for example, show that fiscal year 21 could end in as much as $400 million in ending balance, and that budget analysts are predicting that maybe January's numbers will even show a bigger ending balance. One of the things that we know for sure, this is a problem that we've been dealing with year in with year out, with a pandemic or without a pandemic, and that is transportation funding, for example. If you recall, the American Society of Civil Engineers report card shows that Arizona has a grade of D on roads, saying that the state needs perhaps as much as $24 billion to maintain current roads over 25 years. And there are some other matrices that kind of show that whereas in some parts of the state, our roads are really well, but in rural areas, we do have transportation issues there. Let me ask Representative Toma, what are you looking at in terms specifically of transportation, for example? What do you have in mind for 2021? Is this an issue that you think is going to be set aside for the moment? You should try and grapple with COVID-19, or is this an issue that perhaps you can tackle head on during the session?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, at the risk of jumping ahead of my caucus, I don't want to do that. As Senator Gray said, we'll have to have a conversation, a very serious conversation with the caucus to see where everybody's priorities are. But that aside, I'm a big fan and have been of any sort of infrastructure spending whenever we have excess monies. And now the question of whether or not the money is truly excess is a whole different discussion. There are lots of businesses that unfortunately did not do well during this process. Luckily we've during the COVID recovery process, I should say, there are businesses that haven't been impacted largely, but there are some that have been decimated. And so we have to think about and look and see what the actual impacts are. And they're, unfortunately, as I said, disproportionate, right? So some are considerably worse than others. And so we have a lot to do. And as I mentioned before, part of the reason that I know there's been talk about short sessions or some sort of other continuation only budget, get in, get out, I think that would be a mistake. And I'm not a fan of that, because I think there's a lot to do, and Arizonans need us to do our job. And part of that has to be perhaps in transportation funding. You know, there are lots of big projects that we funded in the past, including I-17 going north from Black Canyon, from Anthem area up to the top of the Sunset Point area. I want to make sure that project is back. Widening I-10, a lot of other roads, as you mentioned, Luigi, that really need help. There's some bridges that have issues that I won't go into specifics, but all of those issues need to be looked at. And perhaps it is a much broader discussion. And this part I'm not ready to commit to yet, because again, we'll have to see how the legislative session continues here and develops. But it might be part of a broader discussion on bigger sort of reforms, which this may give us the opportunity to do. But the ultimate question for me, really regarding every subject, is how many of the changes that COVID has brought on are temporary changes in terms of the way education works, for example, or transportation. The people obviously have used the roads less, right? There's less traffic, right? I guess one small bonus of the COVID thing. But you know, so how many of those changes are permanent versus temporary? Because when a change is permanent, then we have to rethink the way we fund things. But when it's temporary, then again, we have to rethink it, but it's a temporary fix instead of a long-term fix. So those are, we have a lot to do. We really do in the upcoming session.
Senator Rios, ma'am, as I mentioned, you probably will have a bigger ending balance than, we otherwise anticipated, early on during the pandemic. Of course, we don't really know how the economy will look like in 2021. Vaccines could be at some point widely disseminated, and then we're going to see a V-shape, an even steeper V-shape, recovery, something like that. But it looks like we're going to have some extra revenue. Where do you want to spend those money? What are your, potential spending priorities for next year?
Well, I think what we're looking at, when you look at both transportation and education, what you see is the result of literally decades of non-funding, right? Sweeping HERF funds to balance the budget, not prioritizing education in Arizona so that we're dead last for decades. And so I think it has never been a convenient time for folks to repay education or HERF funds. But the fact of the matter is, if you put it off, the price tag gets steeper. I think what we saw, the voters sent a very clear message with Prop 208. They want public education funded. So I think the priority needs to continue to be public education funding. And I hope that my colleagues across the aisle don't see Prop 208 as, the end all in terms of any commitment to public education. Same thing with HERF funds, right? We have swept it for so many years that until we prioritize it, we're not going to be able to make up ground. And so we clearly need to do that. With regard, I have to say, with regard to elections, I sincerely hope, come Monday, the electoral votes from Arizona go to Biden, case closed. This election has been, won repeatedly by Biden. Playing into the conspiracy theories is a waste of time, and it's a waste of money, and using it to further try and suppress the vote in Arizona is going to be a huge disservice. We fully expect that that's going to be a big fight in elections committee. But again, I think what we're seeing right now is a feeding into this, ridiculous conspiracy theory. And unfortunately, it's going to be a waste of time and money come opening session.
I want to ask Senator Gray some of we've gotten a lot of questions from the audience, as you can see. Many of them have to deal with the logistics of the 2021 session. I do want to ask one thing, Senator Gray, in terms of public access to hearings, to the chamber, et cetera. What sort of assurance or commitment can you give to ensure that the public, members of the public are in fact able to participate in the 2021 legislative process?
I don't know what kind of assurance I can give you. I gave you what our focus is as a Senate majority, is that we want to have open and transparent government with people able to be involved, whether it's coming down, which obviously will be limited just because of social distancing, but also via Zoom or digitally. So that's our priority. I don't know any other assurance I can give you, except that is, it isn't something that's not a selling point I'm trying to give you. It's what we've talked about. It's a priority that we have from our leadership team. And so, how we articulate that out in every little aspect, is going to be a process. We've never done it before, so it's going to be a learning process for us all, but that is our priority. I don't think I can say any more.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the last, I'm sorry, you were cutting in and out there, the last sentence or so, sir.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I just said that's our priority as a Senate leadership team. And the president has articulated that more than once, that's her priority. And so it's making sure that people have that accessibility to committees, to testifying. All I can say for assuring is that's the direction that we want to be in. That's what we want to see happening. Again, we haven't worked out all the details because it's a work in process. And just like with everything else, as we're moving along digitally and how we do this, I've been looking at Teams. I've got a lot of familiarity with Zoom because I've been using a lot. But as Representative Toma was talking about, what they're going to do in the House, with Teams, what they've actually got a place where you can actually vote. So you can actually see people's hands. So you could actually see committee members vote visually. We'll see. We'll just have to unfold that and unpack that. But the goal is that open and transparent committee meetings.
When you say Teams, you're talking about Microsoft Teams, right?
Microsoft Teams.
Right. That's what my kid is using as well.
By the way, I do want to add one thing, Luigi.
Go ahead.
It's nice to be blunt. It's nice to have your son there because it's like it's familiar. It's real life. So don't ever feel bad that he's sneezing or making noise, because to me that's a huge plus.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I can tell you from my experience, it's been, I'm kind of homeschooling him full time. Of course, they do have their school materials and what have you, but I'm kind of homeschooling him full time at the same time as working full time. And my situation is not unique. There's a lot of Americans in Arizona that are in the same boat as I am. I want to give you just an opportunity to, let me just end with a question for each of you. And if you could just answer really briefly, what has been the silver lining for you, this several months that we are under a pandemic? Let me start with Representative Ben Toma.
Wow, silver lining during a pandemic. Tough one. Less traffic, that's always good, as I mentioned before. But just more time with the family. There have been rough moments, but overall, it's kind of nice to hang around the girls more.
Thank you, Senator Rios.
Oh, absolutely. Spending more time with the kids, being home. I've become a better cook. We've actually adjusted quite well. It's going to be difficult to get out of, slippers and sweatpants and go back to work.
Senator Gray?
Yeah, I think the air quality is a big plus. I do think, though, that my hope, one of the positives is, as businesses, just like for you, as employees, you end up working out of the house. And I think more and more companies are realizing that's viable. And employees actually do a good job. They're not shirking responsibility. Some are actually working more than what they should. I know when my wife was working out of the house, she actually put in more hours than she did before because it's just work is there. But I think that's a positive. So we may actually see businesses that open up the idea of, yeah, you can work from home. This is what we need to have you get done. And if you can do that, that's great. I think that could end up being a positive force in many ways.
And finally, Representative Bolding, sir, silver lining for you.
Yeah, I think as personally, absolutely being able to spend more time, with the family is absolutely a silver lining. I think for the broader public is that we got an opportunity to see just how creative, innovative, courageous our kids are, our educators are, parents. I think this also gave an opportunity for people who hadn't had to really go through a lot of adversity to see what adversity looks like, especially when you talk about unemployment, when those who never navigated or never had to use the state employment system actually had a chance to see how it works and how what fixes could be at play. So I think a silver lining is it gave more people an understanding of what government looks like and how to access it and how to continue to be creative, critical thinkers and innovators.
And with that, if I could just add my silver lining is, the ability to just spend 24 hours with my kid. And I've really enjoyed that opportunity. And I'm very grateful that I have that chance to, be with him 24/7. And with that, I want to thank the Arizona chapter of the Associated General Contractors of America for sponsoring this forum. Representative Ben Toma, thank you, sir. Senator Rick Gray, thank you. Senator Rebecca Rios, thank you, ma'am. And Representative Reginald Boulding, thank you, sir. And with that, enjoy the rest of your day, and I'll see you around.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.